Good morning, everybody. We're just at 11 o'clock. We're waiting for a couple more to join, so we will start in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Good morning, everybody. Bore da chi. Welcome to all. This is our first Wales's only webinar, and we really hope that you enjoy it. This is also my first only webinar. I've never done this before, so please bear with me if it's not quite as perfect as it might be otherwise. We're all trying to do our very best to make this work, and it's really hard to not see everybody's expressions and to see what you're thinking. So please bear with us, but I hope you enjoy our seminar. Like most people, we're working from home, so there's no professional studio to assist us, but a big thanks to Derek Keeble from my team and all the rest of the CLA team for the technical and other input to make this event what we will hope will be a significant success. If you could all please keep your cameras off, and also if you could stay on mute, that would be helpful in terms of running the webinar itself. We've got 40 attendees from across Wales. 80 attendees. In fact, we're almost up to 90 now from across the whole of Wales. I don't think we would have managed this if it was a physical event. So it's fabulous to see our attendees from Carnarvon through to Pembrokeshire, through to Abergavenny and so on. What I really think we're going to do is rethink how we do events in the future. It's really fabulous to meet up with everybody and to have the social interaction. But I think the strength of our argument for doing more of this kind of activity on digital is really by the fact that we've got nearly 90 people attending the event. Saves time, saves cost, saves the travel, saves time out of the office. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending. We welcome your feedback on this because, as I say, we are starting to rethink how we do events. And so we will reach out to all our members in due course to better understand what the new normal might look like. Do we do more of this kind of thing? Do we do more social events and so on? So in terms of what the CLA has been doing since the lockdown, we shut down our office in Merthyr, but our service levels are exactly the same. We're still answering emails. We still have access to all of our staff. We're answering our phones. We're answering letters, and we're here for everybody. So if you do need anything, nothing has changed whatsoever. Do get in touch, we're here for you. We've had hundreds and hundreds of inquiries from members, particularly in the early shutdown with COVID related issues. We're working really closely with Welsh and UK government through a range of groups to drive your agenda forward. Agriculture, business, issues with dairy, tourism and so on. Meeting the Minister, Leslie Griffiths, regularly, and also interacting with our officials as and when we need to. Same for the Secretary of State for Wales's office, just to drive the agenda forward and make sure that everybody's queries are being answered as well as they should do. Farming carries on, but tourism is really struggling. So we've had some issues with some of the tourism grants. We've picked that up with Welsh Government. We've managed to get that resolved. So hopefully it shows that lobbying does actually work. We're also thinking post-COVID, what is it going to look like? The new normal, if you like, once this is all over. Quite frankly, it's not going to be over, is it, for a long time yet? We don't know when it will finally go back to normality, but it will be different, it will be new. And we have produced a paper on restarting the economy that's starting to look at what the issues would look like after we move out of COVID. Where are the opportunities? It's been awfully tragic, clearly, for many businesses and individuals, and we fully recognize that. But where are the opportunities for a new economy based around doing things differently and doing things in a very different way? We're starting to see things beginning to think about opening now. Garden centres, we're asking for planning to be made simpler, so that it's easy for our members to go out and actually do things without being caught up with bureaucracy. There's opportunities around food, and we are going to need more funding in the future to keep things going. There's also the challenges with unlocking the lockdown. It's different now in England to Wales. What does that mean? How on earth do you police that? We're part of that debate to make sure that doesn't cause significant issues. But that's enough for me, everybody. I'd like to really thank Barclays for their support for this event. It would be very difficult to do this without that. I'd like to thank the speakers for their support as well. Thank you so much for joining our event and being part of this whole experience. So just before I do pass over to the speakers, Barclays are going to be looking at what the banking sector is doing to provide assistance to both landlords and customers. We have Hermione up from our policy team in London, who's going to look at MEs and EPCs and the advice notes that CLA have produced around COVID. And last but certainly not least, Dale James, who is going to look at the changes taking place under the Rent in Homes Act. We've got plenty of time for questions at the end. Please keep firing them through to us, and we look forward to catching up with you later on once our speakers are involved. So I'm now going to pass over to Dale. Sorry, Chris Falk is first from Barclays. Thank you, Chris. I'll leave it with you.
Diolch, Nigel. Bore da and good morning, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk a little about what the banks in general are looking to do to support businesses across the country at this time. I think it's useful to start by saying that I know the default position for my employer, and indeed across all the different finance companies, both large and small, is definitely one of looking to help the client. We are very aware of the huge pressures all businesses are under at the moment, big and small. And we also know it's these self-same businesses which are going to be the engine that drives the country back to its feet again, once we are all actually released. The government have put in place 2 high-profile schemes to assist businesses, which I suspect the majority of you will know about. However, as a quick recap, we have the Coronavirus Interruption Business Loan Scheme, or CBILS as it's being called. Now, this allows businesses with a turnover of up to 45 million to borrow a maximum of 5 million for between 1 and 6 years. 80% of this loan is guaranteed by the government, and the first 12 months interest and any arrangement fees are also covered by the government. The first 6 months capital repayments are also withheld. On top of this, you have the Bounce Back Loan Scheme. Now, this is for smaller amounts of between £2,000 and £50,000. This is also for a 6-year term. Businesses from all sectors can apply for this facility. There are no setup fees, no application fees, and no early repayment fees. The government are backing 100%, or guaranteeing, I beg your pardon, 100% of this loan, and no personal guarantees are taken. However, what is key to understand with both of these schemes is that they are loans and not grants. The businesses will still be responsible for 100% of the repayment of these loans, and that the lender will come to the borrower in the first instance to seek full repayment. As well as these 2 schemes, I have also been assisting clients with putting in place capital repayment holidays on existing loans to allow the freeing up of cash in businesses. This has been particularly useful for property companies, both commercial and residential, where there may have been a request by the tenant to reduce or postpone their rental payments. Now, my specialism within the bank is that of agriculture and landed estates, and a number of these businesses have, as part of their turnover, income from residential and commercial lets. Now, my clients have largely been actively engaging with their tenants in a supportive way. They are very much ensuring that their tenants are safe and healthy, and this active dialogue is making discussions about rent terms somewhat easier. Now, in my experience, estates are generally taking a firm line on rents and ensuring that they are not becoming their tenant's bank. However, there will be times when it is right for both parties to make changes to agreements, and these should be documented and agreed with all involved parties. Therefore, a few things to consider when looking at variations to leases are: if the property is charged to a bank as security, do you need to let that bank know? Does the change to the agreement affect the value of the property in any way? Will the bank need to involve a valuer? Does the change in the agreement affect the security itself? Will the bank need to take legal advice? Does the change to rental terms affect any covenants you may have on your borrowing agreements? Some banks, not Barclays, will charge you to consent to changes. Discuss early what impacts, if any, will occur with your bank and the costs that may be incurred. Where payment of rents is delayed or not paid at all and the impact on your cash flow is significant, the banks can help, and we are helping by using one of the schemes I've already mentioned. What I've tried to do with my clients, and indeed I know all lending managers across all high street banks are looking to do, is working with their customers to understand that gap, making some educated assumptions about how long this is going to go on for, and then how long it will take your business to get back up and running again. Taking out all the costs that are no longer being charged at the moment, which may include staff payments through furlough payments, reduction in overheads at the office if you're not there, and any reduction in tax or HMRC payments. And then seeing what is required by the business to keep everything moving. We will then look at the options available to them and then what best suits their individual needs. And we'll also give the least amount of pressure on the business in the future, while also looking to support them to ensure there is actually a viable and profitable future. The mantra at Barclays, and I am sure echoed across all other lenders, is a good business in 2019 will be a good business in 2021. And this is very much shaping how we approach supporting our clients. There is confidence that with demand still going to be strong for rental properties in the residential market, once we come out of this nonsense, the market will bounce back relatively quickly. Now, I hope that was a useful run through of where we currently are. However, it comes with a caveat that matters are changing rapidly, and I would strongly recommend checking your bank's website in the first instance, a good source of up-to-date information that will be pertinent to you and your business. Please be assured that whomever your bank may be, their overriding desire is to help you and your business. But other than the bounce back loan, where you are effectively self-certifying in the majority of cases, the more help, information and financial support you can give your bank when making an application of any sort can only help their assessment. And that while it is of course our responsibility as a sector to assist the government in the distribution of finance and funding, there is also an obligation to you, the customer, that by putting in place any new funding lines, we are not placing you in greater financial responsibility than you can cope with. Now, I'm sure there will be questions at the end of the presentations, but that's me done for now. So I will hand on to Hermione, if I may.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So this morning I am going to be talking about the minimum energy efficiency standards. I have 5 minutes to talk about these, so I won't be able to go into a lot of detail, but I will direct you towards our 2 guidance notes, which have a lot more information on them, and I will show you how you can access those at the end of this talk. So even though the regulations have been around for some years, there is still a bit of misinformation out there, and I do have members coming with queries which aren't necessarily fall into me's. So what I'm going to do this morning is go back to basics and look at when a property legally requires an EPC. I'm going to look at when that property then needs to comply with meeting the minimum standards. And I'm also going to look at the MEES exemptions available. So firstly, the key dates for the MEES regulations. So these apply to new relevant tenancies from the 1st of April 2018. and to existing relevant tenancies from the 1st of April 2020. And the minimum standards at the moment require a property to meet an EPC rating of at least an E. What is really important to remember is that MEES legislation is separate from EPC legislation. So the first thing I'm going to look at this morning is when a property legally requires an EPC. Because if your property doesn't legally require an EPC, then you don't need to comply with any minimum standards. It takes you outside the scope of MEES. So the main question to look at is whether your property has been built, let or sold since the 1st of October 2008. If it has, then you will legally be required to have an EPC. If it hasn't, you don't need an EPC. Now, looking at the let part of that, because that's probably most relevant to the members listening, that doesn't include lease renewals, it doesn't include lease extensions or rent reviews. So probably a simpler way of looking at it is, has your property been let to a new tenant since the 1st of October 2008? And if it hasn't, the likelihood is you will not require an EPC. Now, if you do have an EPC, government guidance states that that will be treated as voluntary and you will not need to meet any minimum requirement. The next thing you will want to have a look at is whether your property is listed or within a conservation area. Now, government guidance has stated that if a property has a designation, it won't necessarily be exempt from requiring an EPC, and it's up to the building owner to decide. What I would do is, I can't go into the detail of this now, but I will direct you towards one of the guidance notes at the end, because that has the CLA's recommended approach to looking at listed buildings and buildings within conservation areas. But what I would say is you do need to look at them on an individual basis, because there isn't sort of a blanket rule that applies to all of them. And thirdly, which may be less relevant, but a few of you may benefit from this, is that detached buildings of a floor area of less than 50 square meters do not require an EPC. So they, again, fall outside the scope of an EPC and therefore meet. So that can sometimes be useful. So if your property does legally require an EPC, the next thing to look at is whether it then needs to comply with the minimum standards. So this is whether that property is let on a relevant tenancy. So there are 5 relevant tenancies, which should be on your screen. So if your property legally requires an EPC and is let on one of the tenancies on the screen, your property needs to comply with MEES, and that means it needs to have a minimum EPC rating of E, or it needs to have an exemption registered. So there are 6 MEES exemptions, and this is managed on a national central database. It's called the PRS, the Private Rented Sector Exemptions Register. It's a self-certified register, so you or your agent can put in your application. Once it's submitted, it's live. Your relevant local authority will get notified. It's up to them to decide whether to have a look at the application. They may ask you for some more evidence. They probably won't. And so I'll quickly put up the 6 exemptions, and I'll just talk about that first one in slightly more detail, because this is the one I come across most in practice. So this is the all measures have been installed within £3,500. Now, at the moment, government doesn't expect you to spend more than £3,500, and that's including VAT, on relevant energy efficiency improvements. That's what we refer to as the landlord's cap. Now, any relevant energy efficiency improvements you've installed since the 1st of October 2017 can count towards this cap, but you need to be able to evidence those, and that's where sometimes people fall short. So the best form of evidence is invoices, but what I would recommend is wherever you improve your property, make sure you keep invoices, take photographs, and keep any other document that shows what you have done, because that will only be useful in the future and the way we're going with these tightening restrictions. So the next point to quickly make on that exemption is that you may have noticed I said relevant energy efficiency improvements. At the moment, the only improvements that can count towards this cap are the improvements listed on your EPC. So you've then got 5 other exemptions, and there is one of my guidance notes is on EPC exemptions. So I highly recommend having a look at that if you'd like more information on any of those. And then looking at meeting the regulations during COVID-19. So as you can see, the regulations have come in already for existing tenancies, but we're in a position where a lot, it's actually really difficult to undertake an EPC assessment, and probably against government guidelines. Now, the government hasn't released specific guidance on meeting the MEES regulations, and they haven't said they're going to delay the implementation of those regulations. So what we're advising our members at the moment is to follow the same principle that the government have advised for meeting the electric regs and meeting the gas regs. And that is that the government expect you to take reasonable steps to meet the electric and gas regulations. And those reasonable steps need to be evidenced. So what I recommend, if you are in a position where you're not complying with the MEES regulations, is to take the reasonable steps. And the most important thing is to record that. So for example, that might be making a phone note of a conversation with your EPC assessor who said he is self-isolating for 2 weeks. It may be a letter from your tenant who's saying that they're vulnerable and they're shielding and they won't allow access to any contractors, but it's just making sure there's a record of that. So the minimum energy efficiency standards are enforced by local authorities. I don't think it will be a priority during this time to enforce the regulations. That's not a reason not to do it, but I don't think you will probably come up against much enforcement at this time. But it's always really useful and important to make sure you have the evidence available if challenged at some point in the future. So I'm going to point you towards 2 guidance notes because they have hopefully a lot more information than what I've said today. And I find the easiest way to access these is log into your account on the CLA website and type in the code. So if you want to quickly make a note of those 2 codes, they should take you to the guidance notes. So once you've read those, if you still have any further questions, you're obviously welcome to ask in the Q&A now, or I'll direct you towards the regional office and they'll probably pass on your inquiry to me. So thank you very much for listening. And I might be speaking to you at some point in the future.
We're just waiting for Dale to come on board, everybody.
Hello, everybody. I believe I'm on. This is Dale James from his garden shed on the Isles of Scilly in lockdown. First time on Zoom, so bear with me. We're all learning new skills. I've tried to share now the screen with one more thing to do before we get started. I believe. Share. Hold on. Sharing. Yes, we're there. Okay, I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I believe I'm on. Let's just check the top here. Yeah, we're on. Okay, so before lockdown, I was presenting some Legal Update Wales 2020 courses all over the country. And I began by saying it's all changing. Little did I know at that time it was basically just what we're going to go through today, but no COVID. So what's next in Wales? I think it is, as Bob Dylan said years ago, the times they are changing. So in Wales, I think it's got to be known that what you've done today to get you where you are today is not going to get you where you want to go tomorrow, because there are major changes, which I'll run through the basics of now in the next few minutes. Also, I'll just keep getting this going. It's all changing anyway because of COVID, and it's added to the complications. So what's happening away from COVID for a second? Agents are battered by the tenant fee ban was the news before. And yes, there's the tenant fee ban, but there are also specified information for holding deposits, holding deposit legislations, etc. So there's much more to the tenant fee ban than meets the eye, but we are coming to terms with it now. Obviously for landlords, Section 24 taxation, the mortgage interest limitation, that came in April 2020. Didn't stop because of COVID, so you'll find that mortgage limitations, interest will be difficult to charge against your tax. So that's another complication for landlords. Plenty of complications. Capital gains tax changes April 2020 yet again. It was a big month. I think we remember April 2020. But not just the speed at which you have to pay the tax on the capital gains tax. Moving forward, we've heard Hermione go and speak about EPCs and MEES changes. April 2020 again was the major change, and some excellent guidance on the CLA website and guidance notes regarding EPC and MEES. But then the major change that was planned for 2021 spring and was the Rent in Homes Wales Act 2016, which I think we'd like to pop through a little bit more in depth today to give you a start and a heads up of what's coming. And of course, at the end, the Coronavirus Act came in, which has affected many of the before. Yeah. So in fact, as one of the delegates on the courses before COVID told me, even before COVID, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. There's so much going on. So let's get over to the next little section. Today, we've not got a lot of time, so we will, normally I'm presenting 6-hour courses, so let's squeeze it all into the next 15 minutes. And so therefore we'll focus on the Rent in Homes Wales Act 2016, which has passed. A little touch on EPCs and MEES changes, 2 extras. Empty homes due to COVID-19, we're all finding we're paying council tax on our empty homes at the moment. Is there a possible way of an exemption? We'll find out. Finally, a big problem after COVID, apart from arrears, etc., which we've not found to be so bad as we thought so far. But it's how you defer the rent will be a big complication later if you need to enforce. So first of all, we'll jump into the old Rent in Homes Wales Act, which is a little bit of fun. I've got my notes from my to help me. So there's 258 sections of the Rent in Homes Wales Act 2016. And some of the major things that will come in will be the introduction of occupation contracts. In fact, we'll have to change a lot of our terminology in Wales regarding lettings. We won't have tenants anymore, we'll have contract holders. As a matter of fact, you'll see a lot of that terminology being used by Rent Smart Wales already on their sites. But occupation contracts will come in rather than tenancy agreements. And of course, there are 2 types of contracts, secure and standard. Secure contracts are roughly the equivalent of the assured tenancies we already have. And the standard are assured short-hold tenancies in many ways. So the introduction of occupation contracts, and for the first time, we'll have to have, by law, written tenancy agreements. Some people, for example, lodgers will now have to have, when this comes in, when it's implemented, yep, occupation contracts in writing. So that's a start. There also comes along with the Occupation Contracts and Rent and Homes Wales Act, enhanced succession rights. So we have, when somebody dies, there are enhanced succession rights to members of family, but also that includes, very much in the news at the moment, live-in carers. So apparently something like 380,000 live-in carers in Wales at the moment, and they will have enhanced succession rights at the end if your tenant or your contract holder actually dies. So much more to come on that, but a major change will be, like in England, as some of us are watching from England, you have the Fitness for Human Habitation Act, has been in for a while now. In Wales, we haven't had that. So under the Rent and Homes Wales Act, which is essentially, by the way, a replacement for the Housing Act 88, if you can think of it in those terms, in Wales. I know there's a few agents on which will be working in Wales and England. So more complications, but section 91 and 94 refer to the Fitness for Human Habitation specific requirements. So a lot to it, but the main things to pick out of it are, for the first time in Wales, smoke alarms. Whilst everybody puts smoke alarms in, for the first time it will be legal and legally required. Carbon monoxide alarms, and unlike in England where you only have to have it for solid fuel heating, you have to have it for gas heating systems in Wales also. And 5 yearly, preferably 5 yearly, electrical safety tests. So that's just come in England, and it's expected it'll broadly follow the same sort of plan of a date after which newly rented properties will have to have a 5-year electrical safety test, and a date later on, maybe a year or so later, where all properties will have to have electrical safety tests. We know there's not too much of a problem with most safety tests, but it's what it might bring up. And if nothing else, the availability of electricians to do the work for those thousands of properties at the right time. So keep an eye on the electrical safety tests coming in Wales under the Rent and Homes Wales Act. So moving forward though, on a positive side, we have a new abandonment procedure. That horrible situation where the tenant stopped paying the rent, you can't contact him. You've got to try and find out if he's there. They're introduced as part of this act, a new procedure, which essentially means you put a notice on to the tenant on the door. 4 weeks later, you can regain possession of that property without necessarily going to court. So a positive in Renting Homes Wales Act. Sorry there. Okay, retaliatory eviction, however, comes in on the other side. We're used to it in England, but in Wales, we haven't had a retaliatory eviction. So evictions can be postponed or thrown out of court if it's suspected that, for example, you've sent the tenants ask you for a new heating system, and then you send them an eviction note. So if it's suspected that it's a retaliatory eviction, that's coming into under this act as well. In England, we're used to that already, and it's going to be very similar. So the other thing is new time limits on notices. So at the moment, there are no time limits on, for example, your Section 21 notice. A lot of old school landlords might sort of put a Section 21 notice to have one in the bank, so to speak. Well, there are going to be time limits on usage times of the notices, which we'll come to in a second. Now, improvements for joint contracts, they say. I'm not sure for who, but it basically means, and this is quite major, that in certain circumstances, we will lose the protection of joint and several liability. Just drop that off the side there. Joint and several protection, because I know that sometimes if you have some people sharing and one person gives notice on a shared tenancy, that means one out, all out currently. And they've actually put in this act that it may not necessarily be so. There may be split tenancies, which is understandable maybe in domestic abuse cases as well, where we would definitely approve of the person being able to stay on and the abuser to move. So loss of joint and several protection on some joint contracts is a possibility. Oh, hang on a second. Just got to drop that down. So that's the abandonment procedure. I seem to have lost my control. But oh, where are we? No, I'm not moving forward. Bear with me. I was going to make sure this works. Well, I can carry on. I know we'll have these slides on afterwards. I can continue without the slides moving forwards at the moment. So we've gone through notices. So basically, joint contracts, one out, all out is disappearing. Then we come to the big changes, which will be, and if I could just get this moving forward, it would be great, but it seems to have frozen. I'm sure it will come up on the notes at the end. However, notices, in England, we know we're all worried a lot about the Section 21 notice disappearing, which it's all but has happened already. In Wales, we are keeping our version of the Section 21 notice, and it will be called something else, however, because of the 258 sections, we now have 2 different names for our version of the Section 21 notice when it comes in. The Section 186, for example, is a Section 21 version that we no fault eviction notice that we serve within the fixed term, and a Section 173 is for the similar notice that we serve in the periodic. So Section 8 also is going to be a major change with the Section 8, whereas we are used to having a Section 8 notice with 17 grounds for possession. Each of those grounds will have a section number instead. So in Wales, it will be Section 8 for a standard breach will be Section 157, and a Section 8 for that we traditionally use, the ground 8, serious rent arrears, will be called a Section 181. So there'll be different terminology in Wales as well. So I'm not sure if I can actually get this moving now, but not, I will continue. So a lot of us use Section 13 notice to increase the rents in periodic tenancies. There will be a Section 123 version of that notice. But since that then, we're actually moving forward. There already has happened a consultation on an amendment for the Act before it even comes out. It's now become a bill, so there are some little bit frightening situations coming through on this bill, should it be approved. Now, one of the major things will be the Section 173, Section 21, periodic. We thought 3 months during COVID was a bit of a stretch, but basically with the Section 173 periodic, should the bill be approved, which it looks like it's going to be, it's going to produce 6 months notice. So it's going to be a 6 month Section 8 notice as we know them is the Section 173. So we have a 6 month notice period, and the Section 186, the one we serve in within the fixed term, will not be allowed to be served in the first 6 months. So there's major changes on the way we serve notices. Also, if you served a notice, should we say a 6 month notice in the periodic, you'll then only have 2 months to action it. If you don't, you'll have to wait another 6 months before serving another one, and that'll be 6 months. So we're effectively creating, and if I swing through the slides afterwards, 1 year tenancies in Wales, and they're no longer called tenancies, remember, contracts. So moving forward, at this page, we would have moved forward to the EPCs, which Hermione has covered those excellently. I suppose the main thing to remember there is, yes, you don't have to renew like a gas safety. Find out through the guidance notes whether you actually have to renew that tenancy, like do you have the same tenants. Also, remember the EPC is on the house, but the exemption, should you achieve one, is personal to the landlord. So it dies upon the sale. So if somebody's got a property up for sale, F&G rating, exemption has been granted. as soon as the sale goes through, the exemption disappears and is no longer lettable in most ways. Yeah, so always remember that. Obviously, there are penalties, notwithstanding those. The main one would be the £4,000 for not complying with these, up to £4,000. There are other penalties, 2,000, 1,000. So we've got to get it right. So I know several people might have missed a few little bits from their exemption, but there's one more that could have been done, but maybe they missed it off. There could be penalties, so be careful. Okay, now we get to the council tax, which we all stuck with some properties that we can't rent out because of COVID, but we're actually expected to pay the council tax. Now, up until now, not much movement on that with the councils. However, if you look at the council tax exemptions list, exemption G appears to be fitting the criteria at the moment. Exemption G says that properties with an act or an act of parliament or assembly is being made it impossible to rent that property, you should be able to claim an exemption. So exemption G on the council tax is not tested. However, I know a lot of people and a lot of agents who are actually starting to claim this now. We'll see what success they have. I think it might be various councils, various degrees. So deferred rent is another issue we may well have at the end with COVID. You must be very careful if you officially defer the rent, especially in writing, because deferred rent is no longer legally due. So that, what does that mean? So later on, if you want to enforce the Section 8 notice, and you require, therefore, on the Section 8 notice, 2 months worth of rent, to the sum of 2 months rent to issue the notice, it won't work because the rent was not legally due as you've deferred it. So you have to be very careful on deferring rent. A better option is to allow the arrears to roll up and say as long and keep a general guidance so arrears are arising. However, you're not pushing for them because of the COVID situation. We'll approach these arrears later, and that's probably a better way. At that point, then I think there are already mediation services starting up. I know that the TDS has got a mediation service, for example, for just that purpose after COVID, and other companies are setting up mediation services. But in the end, it's all down to relationships with those tenants and landlords. So a good relationship goes a long way nowadays, and I find it at the moment very few really predatory tenants, for example, at the moment. So don't forget, that's deferred rent. Be careful if you defer the rent. Later on, you can set up sort of agreements, etc. But wait for the moment in case something goes wrong later on. As you come out, you can't use that rent. So at the end of most of these presentations, we say what's going to be sort of happening in the next 5 years. So once we get out of this one, it's probably going to be very much the same as the last 5 years, in my opinion. A combination, as we go back to the first presenter, of difficulties and opportunities. It's up to us to grab those opportunities when we can, work through the difficulties. And I hope this quick presentation has given you a bit of a heads up on what's happening possibly after the COVID lockdown ends. Thank you very much. I'll just pass back to Nigel.
Thank you very much. That's absolutely fabulous. We're just going to make sure that we've got everybody's questions online, so please bear with us while we do that. Can I ask everybody as well, if you have got any questions, there are some on screen, but if you would like to send any more through, then that would be absolutely fabulous. So just bear with me while I put the current slide up. So Dale, if you could just turn your screen off. With us, everybody. Okay, so we should have the Q&A's screen up there now. So do please send anything through if you do have any. Just a very quick thanks to all our speakers. A very quick summary as well. I think Chris's message really was, if you do have any concerns in respect of any banking issues, then just get in touch. They certainly don't want to turn people away. That's really is a last resort. And a good business in March is still a good business now. So don't worry, they're there to support you. Hermione, no specific guidelines on meeting needs. I've just picked up a couple of things. I think you need to just follow the same principle if you are being asked to do things as you might with electric and gas regs. Just take any reasonable steps that you need to do to address any issues and just do your best. We're unlikely to see any significant, if any, enforcement at the moment. So as long as you try to do your best, that should be absolutely fine. But please do come back to us. Do have a look at the guidance notes if you're worried or concerned about anything. And finally, from Dale, lots of issues, lots of queries. I think, Dale, we're all very jealous of you being in the Scilly Isles at the moment. I mean, what happens next for Wales? Times are certainly changing. That's one thing that came out from your particular set of slides. Post-COVID, what are things going to look like? They are going to be many changes and differences. And it's clearly a lot of significant detail in there. So we will share the slides, and do come back to us if you have any particular queries. So we've got about, just looking at my watch, about 15 minutes or so left. We do have some questions. Could I please ask all of the speakers to come on camera and also to unmute themselves? And I'm then going to ask do our best to answer all the various questions. Can everybody hear me? Thank you very much. So all of our speakers should be able to see the questions. I'm just going to have a look at them now. We've got a number of open questions to start off. The first one from John Warburton Lee. Thank you, John. When do we have the new occupation contracts in place? Who would like to answer that?
Oh, I'll have a go.
And I think keep it brief, please, Dale, if you can.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. So basically, well, the Act hasn't been implemented yet, and they're talking about it originally as being spring 2021 to be implemented, at which point then they were going to set up a date after which everything will be occupation contracts, and everything before will be classed as an occupation contract. But then they were talking about a transition period of a short period of time to change the short extra clauses into the occupation contracts. So the short answer is no set date yet. It was going to be spring 2021.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Anybody like to add anything else to that? Okay, David, thank you, David Lewis. David, do we have a copy of the recording to review? Yes, we will have a copy, and it will be on live as soon as we can, straight after the event. So you'll be able to see and hear everything that has been said, and hopefully that will be extremely useful. So a question from Alan Kerr Wilson. Alan, thank you very much. What is the situation with regard to septic tanks in rental properties? Is that one for you, maybe, Dale?
Possibly not. I don't know if Hermione would have more on the
Hermione?
agricultural side.
Unfortunately, that's not my area, but what I would recommend is getting in touch with the Welsh office, because the regional surveyor there will be able to let you know on the regulations regarding septic tanks.
So if I could ask you, Alex, if you would like to just add some more detail on there, we can see if we can answer it now, but if not, we certainly pass that on. If you can send, we have your contact details anyway, so we'll be in touch with a reply to that. So either contact the Welsh office, or we'll do our very best to come back to you. We've got your details, so we'll reply to you directly, unless you want to add any more detail now that our speakers can pick up on. So do keep the questions coming in, everybody. We do have a couple of answered questions, but I think as time is fortunately with us, I'll pass on to the speakers to just pick up on some of those. So a question from Ian Fleming. I'm really sorry this was pushed into the answered box by mistake, but I wonder if one of our panelists could just come back to that, please. what is the current situation with the new standardized letting agreements when our own ones have, which are more restrictive? Is that one for you, Dale, or possibly Hermione?
Yeah, let cottage agreements are particularly restrictive, e.g. So current section on new standardized, they're basically talking about the occupation contracts when they come in, I'm guessing. Is this on long-term let then, or holiday let with the let cottage agreements? Parking caravans, we're not the hang wishers. Yeah.
Maybe try and answer that best you can, Dale, because we obviously can't
I'll have a go.
Mr. Fleming easily.
Yes, garden maintenance. Okay. So, okay, so generally, it won't change a whole lot. However, there are a couple of sections to the Act which suggest otherwise. There's a section 101 which in the Act which says the tenants are never responsible for the waste, for example. We're not even sure how that's going to affect. Yep. So, and also the other thing is tenant-like manner is never going to be a part of occupation contracts. That means that tenant-like manner to me is the tenants have to do certain jobs around the house, general jobs around the house, but it's quite simply put in section 101 with the read of the Act, which says the tenants, basically tenant-like manner doesn't apply anymore. And that's terrible for agents because, you know, somebody phones up with a blocked toilet, we're able to say, well, tenant-like manner says you've got to go and get yourself a plunger. Maybe that's not actually going to happen anymore. We've had no answer back yet from the Welsh Government about exactly what they mean, but I think that will move on. So we haven't got an exact answer to how that's going to work. So some of this with the parking caravans, etc., washing, we're not hand washing, would be probably easy enough to put into the tenancy agreements, or should we call contracts, occupation contracts.
Okay.
But a lot of it's hanging out there waiting for things like section 101 to be defined in the Act.
Thank you.
And that's not happening at all.
Thank you, Dale. Sorry to slightly cut you off. I'm just conscious of time. We have a question in the chat zone, which is absolutely fine. So from Ian Howell to all panelists, how does the panel view court possession procedure process when new notice periods are introduced? Even more delays, question mark? A quick answer to that from somebody?
Yes, even more delays, I believe.
More delays?
Hermione?
Yeah, I think what I'll add is that the housing court system is totally separate to the new conditional contracts that are being introduced. And the Welsh Government have been quite clear that they have no power in better funding the court system. So although they're aware that extending the notice period to 6 months will increase the pressure on the court system, undoubtedly, they are unable to guarantee any more funding. So absolutely, the difficulties with the timing at the moment won't suddenly disappear, and they may even get worse where there's that 6 month notice rather than 2 months.
Thank you, Hermione. Okay, we have a question from Antoinette Sandbach. Thank you very much for that. Can you see that, Dale, about the occupation contract? Hermione, one for one of you.
Yes. Yeah, okay. So when the Rent and Homes Wales Act is implemented, basically, as long as the way it's written at the moment, you can't serve it in the first 4 months. You have to serve it after the first 4 months of a fixed term. And then you have 2 months after it's served, they say, to actually enforce it, or it goes away. The amendment is what says can't serve it in the first 6 months, and then there has to be a 6 month period after that, the actual notice period. So essentially creating 1 year tenancies. She is right.
I'll just jump on quickly and say the CLA have written a blog on this amendment bill. So if you are interested in more details, then do go and have a look at the blogs on our website.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And just coming up for a few more questions. So there's a question from Claire March. Thank you very much for that. Any guidance for a holiday let business just about to go live in April? I'd like to answer that.
Where are we?
Just on the open questions, please, Dale. That's either you or Hermione, I think.
Okay.
I suppose I can sort of look at the practical side of things rather than the loan side of things. For holiday let businesses, the government is working on and have already released a level of information and guidance on how tourism businesses can open safely to the public. So what it will be is just understanding and having access to that guidance and being able to implement it, and also being able to look forward and understanding what is important to people. So actually you might be adding value if you can guarantee really good health and safety aspects in a tourism business. So it's something to definitely, if you're new, it gives you an opportunity to be able to add in additional things that perhaps you wouldn't have thought of before this pandemic. So although it's a difficult time, it might also be an opportunity.
I think it's worth saying as well that Business Wales are able to offer lots of advice on anything to do with grants, but obviously as well, please get in touch with the CLA if there's anything we can do to help you with that directly. We can pick that up directly after the chat. Okay, everybody, we've got a few minutes left. Is there anything anybody would like to pick up on the answered questions? I think we have done our best to answer all of those, but is there anything that any of the speakers would like to add to anything on that before we possibly have another final couple of questions?
Let's see what we got there.
No, we've got then please just stop me, everybody, if there is, but otherwise we have a question from Ryan Thomas. Under the new occupation contracts, what notice do tenants have to give? Presumably not 6 months. Who would like to answer that?
On the new occupation contracts, well, they will be still tied to the fixed term, but afterwards it appears that it's going to sort of follow roughly, best to check the blog on them, appears at the moment it's going to follow roughly the periodic, whereas one period pushed forward the day before the next sort of rent is due, as it is at the moment with the shortfalls. However, we've got to be very careful, because just about everything is up for amendment in this act, but it is available on the .gov website as well in full, and it has been updated as well to the next level. So
okay.
The actual update.
Thank you, Dale.
Is on there.
Yeah. I'm conscious of time. We've got a couple of minutes left. Can anybody very quickly answer Timothy Lee's question? Very quickly, please.
Timothy.
I'm leaving.
Where's Timothy Lee? Is he on the?
Maybe we'll have Hermione and Dale have a look at that. Chris, you've gone off very easily on this, haven't you, Chris? We've got lots of challenging and difficult questions. While Hermione and Dale are looking to answer that question from Timothy Lee, anything you'd like to finally add, Chris, at all before we do look to close?
No, you're right. I have been given an easy ride, which I think I'll take in the current circumstances. I think one of the very understandable challenges we're getting at the moment is, along with the safety of family, the next most emotive subject is money. People are struggling. People are finding it hard to get in contact with their banks, their usual bankers, and occasionally and regrettably, they're finding it hard to get the money released. To put in some context, I know the numbers for Barclays, but I'm sure they are mirrored across all other high street banks. We've had, on the bounce back loan scheme alone, over 80,000 applications in the last week and a half. We've lent over 2.3 billion, I think, as of this morning. To put that in context, we've just done business in that small part of our lending book for 3 years in 1.5 weeks. Hopefully that gives some context that we are running flat out, and so there will be delays. All I can assure you, across every bank that you may be banking with, we are trying everything we can to meet expectations. But do keep in contact with your bank is all I can recommend.
Thank you, Chris. That's really helpful. So, do we have a quick answer for Timothy Lee's question? Otherwise, please make sure that we come back directly offline.
Yes, I think it very much depends on the council. I know that it's apparently succeeded up in Dorset, the G exemption because of COVID, and a couple of other areas have had success with a Class G exemption, which basically says an Act of Parliament or an Act, which the Coronavirus Act is. If it stops you renting your property, there's an exemption on Class G. It's one of the ones where the local council gives the exemption, but can claim back apparently from the central government.
Okay.
The Act.
Thank you.
So I think it's very much try it on with your local council.
Sure.
And it has had some success. I know in Dorset, for example.
Thank you, Dale. We are at 12 o'clock now. If we can just quickly finish off. Chris, do you have a quick answer for Ryan Thomas on the bounce back loan? How long does it take to process? Very quick answer. Or can we
Ideally
come back
within
offline?
48 hours. Yes, we can come back offline, but ideally within 48 hours.
Thank you. And a final question from Leslie Smith.
Yep, I got that. Yeah.
Quickly,
So
Dale.
when the way it's written at the moment, when it's if it doesn't change, which I think is likely to change, when the Act becomes implemented, it would probably fall on the landlord, which is why it has to change. But there are other acts that might impact upon that. But generally, the Rent and Homes Wales Act is taking over from the Housing Act 88 in Wales, essentially. And the way it's written at the moment, we are waiting, actually, we've sent to the Welsh Government to clarify that clause 101, not clause, section 101. It's well worth a read because it's very bland. It just says, never responsible for the waste. My belief is that it's not the waste, it's permissive waste is what they're trying to get at, but we haven't had that defined yet.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you very much. Hermione, any very quick closing remarks before we sign off?
No, I don't think so. I think just if you have any questions after today, then do go to region offices because the CLA has a lot of information between us and someone will be able to answer your question. So it's a great service and please do make the most of us.
Thank you so much. Can I thank all of the speakers, please? We are just over 12. Hopefully that was a really good session. Hopefully the glitches weren't too bad and you did manage to get something out of it. Thank you very much to the speakers. And just to finish off, really, if I can just let you know about another session that we've got coming up. This is the tourism update on the 19th of March. Chris, you're back for that session, so thank you so much. We also have some other speakers, including Rob Holt from the Director of Marketing at Visit Wales, Ed Mansell-Lewis from the Head of Vineyards at Strutton Parker, and our very own Charles Trotman from the CLA, who'll be able to answer many of your questions. So do join us at that session. Thank you so much for joining us and have a very good rest of the day. Diolch yn fawr.